Welcome to Our Nation This Week. My name is Dean Allison. Cybersecurity has never been more important as more and more businesses and personal activities move online. The Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity released its National Cyber Threat Assessment for 2020 a couple months ago. Scott Jones, the head of the centre, said, from cyber criminals holding our personal information for ransom to state-sponsored actors threatening our critical infrastructure, the cyber threats Canadians face are increasing in sophistication and severity. That's why the Cyber Centre's approach of security through collaboration is more important than ever. The conclusions reached in this report show why we must continue to work closely with our allies and our partners across government and industry to build Canada's cyber resilience. Joining me on the show this week is David Redekop, who is an expert in fighting cyber threats every day with his business, Atom Networks. David, thanks for joining me on the show this week. And
Glad to be here.
You're the co-founder of Nerds on Site, right? And so let's talk a bit about your background, why you got into technology, and I promise we'll get around to talking about cybersecurity, but let's give a little background on yourself in terms of what Nerds on Site did and how you got to Atom Network. So fire away.
Sure, thanks for having me, Dean. I'm glad to be here. We have an interesting world today. I came from, as an immigrant to Canada, not speaking a word of English, not having been pop cultured whatsoever, and not having any background and never having seen a computer. And then when we got here in 1986, I was a tag along with my parents and 6 other children, so come from a family of 7. And then I was introduced from a church family members to a Commodore 64, and the rest is history. So, at the time, it was just like a wow experience that you can do this with a computer. You can play games. So yes, games is what introduced me to a computer back in 1986.
That's amazing. So talk to me a bit about what Nerds on Site does. I mean, if I understand correctly, you guys have served over 100,000 clients. You helped co-found that business 25 years ago, business, residential. Talk to me about some of the things that you guys did at Nerds on Site.
Yeah, so John Harborenko and I co-founded the company, and it all came out of the need that we saw in the retail world. We had at that time in Canada a big box store called Future Shop, and I was in sales, and he was in computer technical services. And oddly enough, over the last 25 years, our roles have completely flipped. So I'm the more technical one now. But what we saw happening was that clients needed to be served where they were at. And so we took it right to the CEO and said, why don't we take services on site to where the client is? And they said, no, we're a retail store. Clients come to us. We don't go to them. And so we decided to take some holiday time and try out this concept. And we had this little penny saver at the time, which was a classified ad system before the days of Kijiji. Maybe they're still around. I'm not even sure now. But where you could place an ad, the little ones were free. And if you went beyond a certain size and depending on the region, you could purchase an ad. And so we thought we would try it out. And sure enough, there was a great deal of interest in having approachable folks come and help folks with their technology, both in their homes and in their businesses. So that's how Nerds on Site got founded. And when we came back from our holiday, we said, no, we'll work on this business. So that's how we parted on friendly terms and kept some of those friends for life.
That's great. Now, that was almost 25 years ago, 13 years ago, you started Atom Network. So what was the impetus behind that?
So when as we started working with our Nerds on Site clients in the area of internet connection, security, and computers, my wife and I started a family. And we homeschooled our children long before this COVID scenario we found ourselves in, and took them regularly out to excursions. We wanted to have them see what the real world is like. And so one day we come back from a chicken farm, and as we get home, our son is particularly interested in seeing pictures of, this massive sea wave of baby chicks. And so we go on an internet browser and on a search engine, and we type in baby chicks. Well, some of those were not chicks that we were looking for. And so that's what kind of set me on this path of what are we building here for the next generation? How are we ever going to have them utilize this incredible tool that's called the internet, but have it be a safe tool?
Joining me today on the show is David Redekop, and we're talking about data breaches and security. Before the break, you talked about what sort of got you interested in what's going on the internet. So why don't you finish that thought, and let's talk a bit about what data breaches look like and how you guys were able to help.
Yeah, so our role at the time in always looking for solutions for our clients was to bring the best that the market had to offer, and then be sort of the person that assembles the finished puzzle, right? Everyone in the industry makes bits and pieces of the puzzle. Someone needs to put the puzzle together and make it, complete the picture. And so that's the role we found ourselves in. So all of a sudden, I'm in a role of looking for pieces of the puzzle that deal with things like internet security, content filtering, blocking out the content that is not appropriate for children or for adults for that matter. And we found out that every single solution out there didn't meet the bar that we thought it should meet, which was similar to the fence that we build around a property if we don't want children to run across the road, right? We build a fence that's high enough that they cannot easily just step over. But we found was that every fence was like a white picket fence where you simply just took a step over and then you were outside the boundary. And that's what got us down the path of building software from scratch that would meet that high bar.
So, you talk about, information getting in, which now let's talk about data breaches a bit. And I guess the thing is they're a lot more common than you think. And I guess some people probably wonder what they look like, and I've read online where they've increased by as much as 300%, in 2016, that was an FBI number. It's probably even worse by then. Big names like Yahoo, Facebook, Marriott, Twitter, the list goes on, LinkedIn, Equifax, eBay, all these major companies, you think they'd have a handle on this, actually have breaches. And I think the largest breach in 2020 was over 11 billion records. And that wasn't even there was other companies on the list, including Microsoft, that had breaches. So talk to me a bit about the different kinds of breaches and what goes on and what people are looking for when they end up in a place they shouldn't.
Right. And now we almost start measuring how many breaches your personal data is a part of, as opposed to have you been breached. In the cybersecurity industry, we consider every organization as one of two groups: those that have been compromised and know it, and those that have been compromised and just don't know it yet. So, in other words, everyone has experienced some level of compromise already. And the reason for it is because we have this history rooted in the early days of when the internet was developed, when it was still called the ARPANET, and its fundamental purpose was to survive any kind of an attack and be able to route around anything. And so as a net result, we live in a world today in 2021 where malware, where criminal software utilizes the ability to basically walk around just about any kind of fence. That is, any kind of a security perimeter, it can just climb right over or find a hole through it or ride along in plain sight with someone who does have access. And so we live in a world today where security is difficult for exactly that reason. It's all security perimeters are very porous, and that's the reality. So when a breach happens, it could happen because an individual in the company was phished, meaning that they were sent a deceptive email to click on this link to collect this payment, or click on this link to register for this free seminar, or they'll utilize real events, right, and say, click here for the latest news about what's happening on the streets based on this and this event. And as long as we have to be able to receive emails, attackers will continue to be able to send deceptive messages that cause us, regular people, to click on links. And that tends to be the root of usually how a breach begins, is through some kind of deception. There are other mechanisms as well, such as the more advanced versions where your company's boardroom has an Ethernet port where a computer can be plugged into, and a criminal finds a way to make a visit, maybe under the pretense of being a salesperson, and just plug something in there that then launches an attack from the inside. So there's all kinds of ways that these attacks begin, but ultimately nowadays with the same end goal in mind, which is how can we extract data that is of value, first of all, and secondly, how can we then hold them hostage? And that holding hostage or holding it for ransom is now referred to as ransomware. And unfortunately, it's too easy to be a bad guy today.
Well, when we come back, let's talk a bit about the difference between malware, spyware, ransomware, all these things, and what's actually happening when we come back for the break. Anyway, on the show today, we have David Redekop, who's we're talking about cybersecurity. And just before the break, David, you just started talking about ransomware, and I think that's one of the big challenges, right? That's happening now. It's not just spyware, malware, because I think a lot of people end up with some of those things on their computer over time. Let's talk about cybercrime. Let's talk about ransomware, and what is the difference? Why are they looking for passwords and all those other kinds of things?
The entire cyber criminal industry today is a well-oiled machine run by the same kind of personalities that would run organized crime in the traditional world of the mob. And that means that they are equipped with accountants, bean counters that are very aware of what kind of data is worth what, working hand in hand with the technical assistance of these criminals that allow them to identify what kind of data is available to them. And this is obvious because a cyber criminal will be lurking inside of a corporate network on average between 5 to 7 months before an attack is launched. So that gives them sufficient time to analyze what kind of data there is, or to do a deeper dive, and maybe there's an Excel spreadsheet that is password protected. Well, that spreadsheet that's password protected is probably worth more than the Excel spreadsheet that isn't protected. So then they'll take time and try and break it and crack it. And the reality is that most normal business people aren't that concerned in our part of the world about people around them having access. So maybe another user has access to it. So bottom line is they spend those months, the cyber criminals, in gathering a really complete picture of the entire environment. And then once they have done that, they look at the profile of the company. The profile of the company, then they have a good idea of how many staff are employed, what their top line revenue is per year, likely what they can afford in terms of a ransomware payment. This is really key because they'll peg the ransom amount to be just high enough, just low enough that there isn't an immediate reaction that we can't pay that and it's impossible to pay, but high enough that they haven't left any money on the table, right? So they take the traditional business strategies into account, and that's how they come up with the ransom payment. We've been involved with with really high volume of cybercrime inside of an international organization doing an incident response project where the ransomware demand was over $500,000. And so we were then involved in that very immediate negotiation back and forth of trying to see if there was any room to move on that. I'm happy to tell you that we ended up paying none of that, and with the incident that I'm referring to here, and we wish more would do that. But unfortunately, more companies pay than do not, and so therefore the business continues to evolve, and the decline has not yet happened. Like, we haven't seen peak ransomware yet. It's still growing, and it's still expecting to grow in the year 2021. So
are they basically freezing the system? I mean, you talked about organized crime, but I've also read about state-sponsored programs. So is that part of it? Like Russia and that kind of stuff. And what kind of dollars are we talking? I mean, what kind of dollars are businesses losing? Because you mentioned you were able to help those people out of that situation, but is it what kind of extortion are these guys paying right now?
That's a good question. The extortion amount has varied over the years. When Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies first became a possible means to actually do an international or a global a transaction, mostly anonymously. That's what made the ransomware possible. And so it started up at being a few $100s worth on individual PCs. So it would be my mom would be a target because she's browsing a regular website that's serving ads, and those ads were bought by a criminal who then used that drive-by opportunity to deceive her, to download something that was going to be of interest to her. And then that turned out to be malware that then encrypted the hard drive, and so it was a couple of $100 several years back. Now, the amount is always irrelevant to what that company can likely pay. And what they'll often do now is the criminals will do enough research to find out which insurance company is insuring them and finding out what they're insured for, and then set the ransom demand for that amount. So they're very much on purpose in setting the ransom demand to be the maximum possible.
Okay. Well, David, when we come back, let's talk a bit more about how you help people out to get out of some of these situations. Coming back in the break, we'll look at those things. I've got David Redekop joining me here on the show today, talking about cybersecurity. You talked a little bit, before what was going on in terms of, it could be adware, it could be phishing. It is actually pretty simple ways. I mean, very innocuous ways that these people get into your systems. And it's not just, big companies, small companies. It's everybody is really susceptible to this.
That's right. There's nobody that's immune to it, right? It could come as a text message to your phone that's brand new, or as an email to a device that's 6 years old. Either way, all of us in one way or another are reachable unless we live in a cave. So there is no one that is immune to this. That's true.
So what kinds of solutions you offer? Obviously, there's off-the-shelf antivirus protection and some of these other things that probably look at a very minimal. Given the fact how prevalent this is, I mean, I have a list of companies here that I see that have had issues: Royal Military College, Canpar, Bird Construction, law firm. Really, there's nobody that, as you said, is not immune from this particular threat.
Yeah, that's very true. And one of the reasons why this is the case is because the criminals can always focus on the one area of weakness. It's never been a fair game in our world. And it's like that in the analog and the real world as well. As a good guy, you have to find all of the weaknesses, all of the security vulnerabilities you have. That's what your security team is responsible for. But the bad guy can be lazy, only needs to find one weakness and then maximize that weakness in order to hijack the whole situation. And that's basically what they do. And because the internet itself and our way of life and even our philosophy in terms of blocking threats is old school, they can continue to utilize the fact that our philosophy is broken. And our philosophy has been, up until recently, and for most people still is, that we'll allow everything in, but we will block the known threats. And that's like looking in the rearview mirror of a car and then trying to drive forward. We're only looking at what happened in the past to identify them as threats. And so what we are working towards is raising a level of awareness that there is a better way. And that better way is a different philosophy. And then there's services and software and solutions that go with it. But the philosophy is this, that instead of allowing everything and blocking what is known to be a threat, we decide that we're just going to start and do a reset button. Think of a big reset button on the internet and on services, and then that says now there's nothing. The internet doesn't exist. Oh, but I need to go to TD. Okay, TD is investigated. It's safe. You can now go to the TD. It's automatically added to your allowed list, right? And so you build your allow list, and that's the world that I live in. That's the world that our team lives in. And now it doesn't matter. You can send our CFO a phishing link, and that phishing link will go nowhere. Because if it's a link that doesn't go to a real bank or to a real payment gateway or to a real service that we know that's useful, then it just simply doesn't go there unless then it's investigated and checked, yeah, this is legitimate, it's safe, you can go there, and then it's automatically allowed. That approach is matched up with a philosophy of saying, we don't go anywhere unless A, we asked for it, and B, it's better to be safe through some kind of automated process.
We have less than a minute left. Give us some advice as we're looking at moving forward and trying to protect our computers, protect our, what are some things that we can do to make sure that we're being vigilant?
Yes, thank you for that opportunity, because there's one way that we can really thwart the cyber criminals, and that is by not giving them such easy access to our personal information. And even this year, it's projected that the number one weakness will be password reuse. We use the passwords of our date of birth, of the day that we fell in love with our spouse, or we got married, or our oldest child, or our pet, right? We are creatures of habit, so we use these easy things to remember. So the number one thing is use a password manager. And it may seem like a big step, but once you get used to having a system automatically fill in the passwords for you, you don't even know what your password is. You'll have a unique password for each service. Then when that service is breached and it lands in the hands of a criminal, they only have access to that service, not your same password that you use for everything. And so let's just raise the bar of what it takes to be a criminal. We don't think that there's any more practical way to do this, but to make it so difficult for them that it makes more sense to do business the honest way.
Thanks, David. Thanks for the time you've spent today with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.